Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about Chapter 7, which is about culture in management. When it comes to understanding culture, keep in mind that it is one dimension of diversity in any workplace, and managers should effectively deal with it. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to attract and retain top talent in the organization. So culture can be seen as a set of values that are shared by members of an organization, which determine what type of behaviors and attitudes are acceptable and which ones are not tolerated in the organization. Organizational leaders need to be very sensitive to multiple cultures, which can differ from those of the organizational cultures. So diversity management is one way of coping with the increased cultural changes that tend to impact organizations, whether they are private or public, whether they're small or large, whether they are a national company or international organization. Chances are they'll be impacted by culture. However, organizational culture is very different from that of the national culture. And sometimes organizational cultures need to be strategically designed and hopefully be in alignment with the expectations of the national culture. But nonetheless, organizations obviously focus on being competitive through the learning of the organizations and the human resources asset, which can differentiate the quality of service and the quality of the product that's provided in the country compared to those of the competitors. So this is one of the reasons why many organizations focus on understanding and developing an organizational learning environment. So managers do seek to improve each employee's ability to understand the company and the environment to raise their overall effectiveness as a team, as an organization, and obviously as individual employees. In learning organizations, though, managers try to improve the people's ability to behave creatively, productively, and collectively to maximize organizational learning. So when it comes to adapting to the learning organization, individuals adapt a lifelong learning attitude, which are extremely essential and vital to competing in this postmodern workplace in developing economies. Learning organizations specialize in creating, in acquiring, and also in transferring knowledge throughout the workforce efficiently and in a timely manner throughout the organization. One of the top leaders in the learning organization area happens to be Peter Senge. According to Peter Senge, learning organizations are organizations where people continually expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, where new and expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured, where collective aspiration is set free, and where people are continually learning how to learn together. He goes on to say system thinking is needed more than ever because we're becoming overwhelmed by complexity in our organizations, in our environment, especially nowadays with the introduction of artificial intelligence and the fact that we can have machines help us gather and accumulate information in a matter of minutes. Perhaps for the first time in history, humankind has the capacity to create far more information than anyone can absorb, to foster far greater interdependency than anyone can manage, and accelerate change far faster than anyone's ability to keep pace with it. That's the idea behind systems thinking, where we see how the whole is impacted by the individual parts. Instead of living in silos, we tend to see the whole and how obviously the various parts are interdependent on the functionality of the whole. Sangha's learning organization, they encourage system thinking by developing personal mastery, by building shared vision, by promoting team learning, and by building complex, challenging mental models that involve learning as well as sharing among everyone in the organization. So he suggests top managers follow several steps to build in personal mastery. Managers empower their employees and allow them to create and explore. With regards to mental models, the key is to challenge employees to find new, better methods to perform their jobs every single day. This is the whole idea behind TQM, or total quality management, or continuous improvement, or what the Japanese know as Kaizen. And team learning is more important than individual learning, since most decisions are made in groups because the challenges are becoming more complex. So individuals making decisions will hopefully provide better solutions than people alone. Shared vision means people share a common mental model for the firm to evaluate opportunities. When we all think alike and go in the same direction, chances are we'll get there more efficiently and faster than different units in the organization go in different ways. So systems thinking is about knowing that actions in one area of the firm impacts all others. It is the interdependency of various departments and functions within the organization. So personal mastery is the ability to continue to create what matters to that specific individual. Two of Sangha's 5 disciplines for a successful learning organization are directly related to continuous learning by employees of the firm. That is personal learning and team learning. Personal learning and mastery has been linked to reduced turnover intentions, increased job satisfaction, job-related attitudes, and organizational success. Associated with personal mastery is learning as a team, or team learning. So team learning is realized when individuals are learning and are not only free, but they are encouraged to question various organizational assumptions that have been part of the norm over the years. In some situations, this actually leads to additional conflict within an organization, but you need to overcome them successfully in order for teams to function effectively in an interdependent manner with all the others. So team learning and personal mastery means continuous reflection of what is important, seeing reality clearly, the Pygmalion or self-fulfilling prophecy effect being noticed, and each person obviously having the same vision and supporting each other, questioning the status quo. Without personal mastery and learning, employees cannot have an organizational learning. In a diverse organizational culture, we can use the tolerance, awareness, and personal development, or TAP model. So the acronym of TAP could help leaders and managers define, measure, and develop a more comprehensive program to manage cultural diversity in the organization through tolerance, awareness, as well as continuous personal development. When it comes to understanding a culture, researchers have identified several important categories for us all to study. That is a sense of self and space, communication and language, dress and appearance, food and feeding habits, time and time consciousness, relationships, values and norms, beliefs and attitudes, mental processing, learning, and work habits and practices that are a part of every single society. Culture is a shared system of symbols, beliefs, attitudes, values, expectations, and behaviors. Bert Hofstede said that culture is the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one human group from another. So culture in this sense includes systems of values, and values are among the building blocks of culture. So culture is something that unites people across the globe. There's the Chinese culture, and then within the Chinese culture, there are subcultures. There's the American culture, the Russian culture, the European culture, the Afghan culture, the Indian culture, right? The Venezuelan culture, the Haitian culture, and the Bahamian culture, the Jamaican culture, and so on. So people are united around their country, around their culture, around their language, around their religious beliefs, and so on. So culture can unite people. Subcultures are cultural groups that exist within a major culture. So a person may belong to many subcultures based on his or her ethnicity, religious philosophies, social upbringing, and even professional certifications and learning. Values are assumptions about how things ought to be in the society. They're often held at a pre-conscious level and may never be fully articulated. On the other hand, beliefs are conscious perceptions of things that exist in society and how people ought to behave in the environment where he or she is being brought up or living or working. Learn about cultures by reading books and articles, studying history, religious philosophies, politics, values, and customs, and studying the language, and also maintaining a realistic expectation about how things should be done. And when things change, we must adapt with it. Also, discussions about high and low cultural context. Context is the information that surrounds an event, and it is readily available within the person. A high context communication or message is one in which most of the information is already in the person, while very little is in the coded, explicit, transmitted part of the message. On the other hand, a low context communication is just the opposite, where the mass of the information is in the explicit code. So high context cultures tend to have long-lasting relationships, shared codes of communication where superiors are held responsible. Verbal agreements tend to be common, and outsiders and insiders are distinguished easily from one another, and cultural patterns change slowly. On the other hand, low context cultures are places where relationships tend to be short-term. Communication is explicit. Authority is included at all levels and very difficult to pin down. Written agreements are common. That's why in the American society, we have a lot of lawyers that have to review all agreements before we sign them. In low context cultures are where insiders and outsiders are not easily distinguished, and cultural patterns change quickly. States' cultural dimensions originally came with 4 dimensions for us back in the 80s, which included power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity. And then in 1990s, he added a 5th dimension regarding cultures having either short-term orientation or long-term orientation. And then finally, a decade later, he also added a 6th dimension regarding indulgence and restraint in cultures. Indulgent societies tend to allow gratification of natural human desires related to enjoying life and having fun. However, restrained cultures or societies tend to believe that gratification needs should be curbed and regulated by strict norms. So if you're spending the money you don't have, you're definitely from an indulgent society. On the other hand, if you're saving for a rainy day, you have that type of mindset, then you're probably brought up in a restrained culture or society. Indulgent cultures tend to focus more on individual happiness and well-being. Leisure time is more important, and there is greater freedom in personal control. However, in restrained cultures, positive emotions are less freely expressed, and happiness, freedom, and leisure are not given the same level of importance as they are given in indulgence-oriented societies. So keep in mind that behaviors that are desirable in one city, one culture, one environment may not necessarily be desirable in all cultures or in different cultures. Therefore, expats and international managers need to be very sensitive to the local cultural norms in societies where they are operating, and we must adapt to the local needs and norms. So think about which values are applicable in your culture and how do they vary from other cultures. Does your culture focus on competition or harmony? Does it focus on individuality or teamwork and collectivism? Is there a domineering personality or friendliness and flexibility encouraged? Is there direct eye contact or basically looking down to be polite? And also, do we point mistakes out in public or do we try to focus on saving face? And finally, do we focus on business at all times or do we focus on the development of relationships in a culture where you are brought up? So chances are that some of those norms would vary quite significantly from other cultures. Sometimes expat employees and managers are accused of being ethnocentric. Ethnocentricity is basically a trait that is especially true of some members of dominant cultures, especially if there is a superiority complex, where we think our way is always the best way and we impose that on others. So keep in mind when it comes to being an international or expatriate employee, being ethnocentric is not a very desirable trait to exercise. The assumptions people make are often influenced by the culture they were brought up in during their socialization years when they were a child. Although as adults, obviously, we have a little bit more control over our behaviors. So when things are very, very different, when we move into a new cultural environment, sometimes we experience what is known as culture shock, which is a sense of psychological disorientation that some individuals suffer when they move into a new environment, a new culture, a new country. Keep in mind that culture shock is often the initial adjusting process that an employee experiences when encountering a new environment. So it's a natural response to a new cultural experience. However, if it lasts quite a while, that means you might lose that employee. He or she may not want to be an expatriate. Therefore, he or she might want to come back home. So there might be a huge expense and obviously loss of experience by sending somebody abroad and it doesn't work out for him or her. Some of the symptoms associated with culture shock could be a reaction of anger and hostility toward the new culture, a nostalgia for things back home, having anxiety, depression, loneliness, not being able to sleep. The fear of being exploited by local people is another symptom of culture shock. Always being irritable or irritability of the individual could also show that he or she has symptoms of culture shock. Frustration over diet, digestion, housing, and transportation are all elements associated with symptoms related to culture shock. And unfortunately, some people might excessively drink or smoke or pick up gambling habits simply because he or she's in a new environment and wants to adjust but has difficulty due to the culture shock that he or she's experiencing. Another part of this chapter relates to the Johari window matrix, where the idea behind self-disclosure is discussed. So there are two models that have been actually used to illustrate self-disclosure. That is the social penetration model in the Johari window. In this chapter, we discuss the Johari window. Many decades ago, Joe Left and Harry Ingham developed a conceptual model to help us understand what might be going on in interpersonal relationships. So the name of their model is the Johari window. Johari window matrix is a useful way of viewing self-disclosure. It's also a way of showing how much information you know about yourself and how much other people know about you. And obviously, the Johari window matrix is named after the founders, Joe and Harry. So they combined it as Johari window. So self-disclosure has been investigated and researched for many decades now because it is a very useful strategy for you and I to share information with our teammates, with our colleagues, with our bosses, and even with our customers in some cases. When we share this information, we become more intimate with our colleagues and customers. And interpersonal relationships tend to become a lot stronger. And obviously, we have less miscommunication as a result of it. So the Johari window has 4 different quadrants. There's information that is known to a person and information that he or she does not know about him or herself. There's content that others know about us and things that others do not know about us. So there's the public self, the blind self, the private self, and the unknown self. Which one is the biggest for you? Obviously, everybody's quadrants vary to some extent. Some people share a lot more information with their colleagues, some people do not. Nonetheless, hopefully, our blind self and our unknown self are somewhat small. The more we know about ourselves, the more we can plan around our strengths and obviously mitigating against our weaknesses. Good luck knowing your own Johari window and obviously making it relevant for your goals in the future and also in teamwork. Is to be who you are since there's only one you. Regardless of how much you know about yourself and your colleagues, chances are we kind of push other individuals, obviously, to tell us more of their private data. Nonetheless, there are some guidelines for a diverse staff. So experts offer some suggestions for easing tension between racially and ethnically diverse healthcare staff members. So every industry could have its own guidelines. For example, offer in-service training to the foreign-born doctors on what to expect from American nurses. One of the nurses' important roles is to serve as an advocate for his or her patients. The nurse will not blindly obey a physician's order if it is believed to be detrimental to the patient. Instruct workers to act in a less confrontational manner. Offer assertiveness training to those staff members who, by culture, tend to be somewhat submissive. Males from countries that lack sexual equality may refuse to take orders from a female supervisor. This issue should be openly discussed, and if change does not occur, then obviously counseling and termination could be considered. Offer an in-service workshop on the specific jobs expected of American nurses and the nature of the nursing culture. Offer in-service training on doctor-patient roles in different cultures. Offer sensitivity training to everyone in the organization that deals with healthcare. Establish clear rules concerning the speaking of native languages. Encourage openness in communication. For example, let someone know if your feelings have been hurt to clear up any misunderstandings before you go home, before you leave the job. Require all staff and employees to notify their supervisors when they have religious beliefs that interfere with the medical practice. So these guidelines for a diverse staff in a healthcare profession are applicable in many other professions. So the key is to adapt to your needs in the department and your organization overall. Cultural diversity is often seen as an opportunity and welcome for many reasons. The company can better satisfy the needs of their clients, The firm can become more competitive in responding to client needs faster than their competitors by having diverse employees. Indifference often indicate personal creativity, which can eliminate groupthink. So cultural diversity should be welcome, but there must be uh, accompanied by proper training, sensitivity, open-mindedness, respect for each other, and open dialogue, especially when employees have different views regarding how things should be done in the organization. Ultimately, remember that it is what is inside a person that makes a difference. So the more we help people think different, more likely that his or her feelings will be consistent with those thoughts, and also his or her behavior will be in alignment. So where the behavior, the feelings, and the thoughts could all be consistent and hopefully in alignment with that of the organization's values. As always, through equity and inclusionary practices in any industry, you can make diversity an advantage for you, for your team, and for your organizations. Good luck.